So here's how it works. It's an open-ended line of credit. And what I mean by that is it's like a credit card where I can, as long as I pay money back, I can borrow more out. So I can take out money, and if I put money against it, I can take it back out and I can re-borrow the same money. It's an open-ended line of credit. I don't like associating it with credit cards because credit cards often have, predatory levels of interest, and this doesn't have that. These are very reasonable interest rates, but it is helpful because everybody's familiar with credit cards. We know there's a credit limit and there's a balance, and that balance is completely up to me. And if I pay it down, that means I can take more out because they will let me re-borrow that money if I want to. So it's an open line of credit. You have to be 62 or older to use it. There are some products, in that narrow part of the pie chart that we talked about or that I showed in the last slide, there are some products where you only have to be 55, but by and large, you got to be 62 or older. And the first unique feature is that monthly payments are optional. You don't have to make a monthly payment on the amount that's borrowed. So like any other line of credit, I don't have to pay interest on the line of credit that I didn't use. I only pay interest on the balance. But with a reverse mortgage, you don't have to make a payment if you don't want to. So that's the first unique thing. Now, clearly there's interest involved, but if I don't want to make a payment, one of my options is to let it accrue on the balance rather than paying it.
That's such a difference from what we all think of the traditional mortgages, where if you miss a payment, it's really bad.
So many things can throw curveballs and will throw curveballs that optionality in the form of whether I want to make a mortgage payment or not is huge. It's
Right.
huge. Like I can't imagine anybody preferring a mortgage where I must make a payment versus a mortgage where I can make a payment if I want to, and I can stop if I want to. I can skip a month if I want to. I can stop altogether if I want to. And what you said earlier, like you said, if you miss a payment, you're in hot water. Like, yeah, like the hottest water there is, you could lose your house. Like
Right.
it's not something you want to play around with. But imagine a couple at age 82 and somebody has dementia and they're trying to take care of some medical bills and they need to skip their mortgage payment for 3 or 4 months or stop making it altogether. You try to do that with a regular mortgage and that's almost laughable. We all know that you can't skip mortgage payments on a traditional mortgage. But on this one, if you've been making payments for 15 years or something, and all of a sudden you don't want to make payments anymore, okay, then whatever the balance is, it will create interest and you can just let that accrue on the balance if you want to. And you can pick up mortgage payments later if you want to, or just never make a mortgage payment again. The next unique feature is that the balance isn't due until the last borrower leaves the home. So with most mortgages, there's some kind of timing mechanism, a 30-year fixed mortgage or a HELOC that has access to the line of credit for 10 years, and then they amortize the balance after that over the next 20 years. That isn't true with a HECM. What happens is the balance is due when the last borrower leaves the home. I say the last borrower because it's often a married couple. They can be co-borrowers. But the loan itself, the balance, isn't due until they leave the home permanently. And that could mean death. If you pass away, then the loan would become due and the children would have to either sell the house and take the equity, or if they wanted to keep the house in the family, they could refinance whatever the balance is on the reverse mortgage with a new loan in their names. But either way, the reverse mortgage at that point is due, but it's not due until then. So you could put a line of credit in place at age 62 and you wouldn't owe whatever the balance is on that. You could live till you're 140 years old and it would not be due until you passed away or moved permanently from the home, right? If you sell the home, the loan is due because that's true about all mortgages. But that's when the balance is due and not until then. The next unique feature is that it's non-recourse. This is hard to exaggerate the value of. What a non-recourse loan is, it means that the lender cannot go after you or your heirs if the loan isn't paid in full. Essentially what this means is that they are guaranteeing that the house will serve as collateral regardless of how much is owed when the balance is due. Now, if you think about these first two elements, that the payments are optional and the loan isn't due until you leave the home, you can imagine a scenario where somebody at age 62 maxes out the line of credit. They max out the balance and they never make a payment. Now you can conceive of an example where that balance accrues because they never make a payment. They just let the charges accrue on the balance. And the home that they're living in just sort of languishes. It doesn't appreciate much. And eventually the balance exceeds the value of the home 20 or 30 years later. That's possible because we can't guarantee home appreciation. Well, what a non-recourse loan does, what that feature does on this loan is it says when the loan is due, if more is owed on the balance than the value of the home, FHA will take care of that. That's not your problem. That's what it means to be FHA insured. So that isn't the borrower's problem and it's not the heirs' problem. They do not have to pay that extra. It is non-recourse. Not only is it non-recourse from a financial perspective, it's also non-recourse from a social perspective. It doesn't even hit their credit. Because what happens there is the bank recoups as much of the loan as they can, and then they make a claim to FHA to pay the difference.
Essentially means it sounds like you can never be underwater on your HECM like you could be on a traditional mortgage.
That's correct. You can never owe money when you sell the property with a HECM on it. You can only get equity if there's equity in the property, you'll get that. It doesn't belong to the bank. That's a stubborn myth that people think about reverse mortgages, is that the home belongs to the bank. But if there is no equity left, if they spent all the equity and took it out and it exceeds the value of the home, you cannot possibly owe money when you leave the home with a HECM. That's guaranteed not to happen. What people often associate that with when they think somebody loses the home, what happens is people spend all of their equity, and when that happens, they pass away and there's no equity left over. If they've spent, like if they run up the balance, and that's the equivalent of spending the equity, right? We talked about that being equivalent. Instead of selling portions of the equity, which you really can't do anyway, you borrow against it. That's the same thing. And if you use all of your equity while you're living and there is nothing left to pass on to the heirs, then they won't get any equity. But is that the bank taking the home? No, it's somebody spending their equity before they passed away. And in some cases, that's what they wanted to do because it kept them from spending other assets. For example, would you rather inherit a $1 million home that's paid off free and clear, or would you rather inherit a $1 million portfolio from your parents? And it's sort of like, I mean, other than the hassle of the real estate, it's like, well, it doesn't really matter, right? So if I spend my home equity and that allows me to preserve my Roth IRA or something, like my heirs should be okay with that. When you look at the whole picture, you might look at that and say, oh, we didn't get to inherit the house because it had a reverse mortgage on it. Well, it's like, yeah, but they spent the equity, and by doing that, they preserved the other investments. If you look at the whole picture, like that might even be advantageous.
Yes. Or they help prevent it being a financial burden on their kids too.
Yeah, like that's huge. Yeah, if you think about the kids who would be angry that they didn't inherit more equity from their parents, but that home equity allowed them to take the full dose of their prescription or eat 3 meals a day. Like, can you really imagine? Think about your relationship with your parents, right? If you were to think, well, mom and dad, don't spend any of your equity because I want that as an inheritance. I know that you're struggling financially, but you owe me that house. Like, who in their right mind is on that kid's side of the table? Like, right? That doesn't make any sense. This non-recourse feature is basically just guaranteeing that you're not strapping somebody with debt that the house can't pay for. And the next unique feature is another thing that's really impossible to exaggerate, is that the credit limit, we call it the principal limit. So I may be using that term a few times, but it's just the credit limit. The credit limit itself increases for the life of the reverse mortgage, for the life of the HECM, and that is not respective of the value of the home. So regardless of what the real estate market does, the credit limit on the reverse mortgage is constantly increasing.
That's so different from regular mortgages where, you know, you buy a home and 20 years later the value's gone up and you can't access any of that value versus, you know, unless you refinance, right?
This is the light bulb moment. It's like, wait a second, what are you serious? The value of the home is appraised just like any other loan, and the line of credit begins as a percentage of the value of the home, and it's based on a table that FHA publishes. But after that, the value of the home is more or less meaningless. The line of credit begins at a certain amount based on the value of the home when you get the loan in place. But after that, it starts growing based on something entirely different than the real estate market. What determines that growth is the 1-year treasury plus a spread. So all we're doing is we're making equity in the home liquid. Whether you use the balance or not doesn't affect the fact that the credit limit is constantly growing, guaranteed, and won't ever stop until you leave the home. Now, one thing I want to point out here, if you replace a current mortgage that requires a payment with a reverse mortgage that doesn't require a payment, you have to make sure you pay your taxes and insurance. Remember that your mortgage, when you pay your mortgage payment, some of that was escrowed for tax and insurance. Because the reverse mortgage doesn't do that because payments aren't required, you need to make sure that you have a strategy to pay your taxes and insurance on the property. So FHA publishes this table that tells what the lines of credit will be as a percentage of the value of the home. And those are based on age. Because what FHA has to underwrite for is that you could use all of that credit and never make a payment again. And if you're 62, they have to have a pretty big cushion of equity for them to feel comfortable doing this. But if you're 92, they can lend quite a bit more because actuarially speaking, they know they're going to get that money back. It's going to get paid back sooner than if you're 62. Again, actuarially speaking. So the line of credit, where it starts as a percentage of the value of the home, is higher if you're older and lower if you're younger for that reason. But once it's in place, it starts growing based on the criteria I mentioned earlier, the 1-year treasury plus that spread.